Good evening, everyone. On the behalf of Amity Innovation and Design Center, I, Saket Kumar, welcome you. And on the behalf of Amity Institute of Organic Agriculture and Asset Mechanical Engineering, we welcome you, sir, Dr. Saket Chattopadhyay, sir. So, Dr. Saket Chattopadhyay is a manager Binos at Indigram Labs Foundation, Delhi. Dr. Chattopadhyay has a PhD in molecular biology from University of Delhi and has more than 12 years of national and international experience in research, teaching, entrepreneurship, and creative writing. He has also authored a number of books. So, Saket sir, I welcome you again in this TEDP. So, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Saket. This is one of the rare occasions where Saket is talking to Saket.
Yes, sir.
I thank entire Amity University, especially the Incubation Center, for inviting me again. And a little bit about myself. Of course, I have been introduced. But three or four three-pronged things that I need to explain to the budding entrepreneurs here. That I did my PhD from Delhi University. I went for postdoc at University of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. I was there for 3 years. I came back, taught in Delhi University for 3 years. Then I opened my own biotech company. I have this biotech company where I produce spirulina tablets and nutraceutical tablets. And I write at the nights. And my day job is basically running a biotechnology focused incubator that is funded by BIRAC, Department of Biotechnology, and its focus name is called BioNest. So that's pretty much about myself. I have a PG diploma in marketing management, equivalent to MBA in marketing also. So with this background and with experience in a little bit of entrepreneurship, that what I understand from my job in Indigram Labs Foundation and being an entrepreneur myself, so I can give this presentation in terms of my understanding of this field and the things that I faced, actually the problems that I faced and the current scenario that you have. The entrepreneurs that have at this moment, it's basically a blessing for the entire the entrepreneurial ecosystem right now, because with our honorable Prime Minister launching so many schemes for the entrepreneurs, this is a golden moment for innovation, entrepreneurship, and this entire ecosystem development. So with this word, I'll just start my presentation. So. I hope it's visible.
Yes, sir, it is visible.
So I've been given the topic, how to find out the pre-feasibility of a project. And it's basically an umbrella that comes under preliminary project report writing. So, we have to demystify this thing. To start with, I should say that there are lots of technical terms, jargons in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So nobody has to get very worried about those technical terminologies. They are a little bit less difficult than all those floral formulas that you have remembered in your BSc or MSc. So you don't have to worry about them. You just have to dig in and stay brave and understand what are these things. And within a couple of months or 2-3 months, you will be able to demystify all these terminologies. So you have to just keep on sailing and find out what actually clicks and what doesn't click for you, and whether you like it or not. So entrepreneurship is totally focused on what you like, where you are going, how you are going, whether you are able to build a team or not, whether you have those acumens of an entrepreneur, or you can develop them over time. And even if it fails a few times, fail fast and go ahead, learn from those mistakes and take up further mature challenges. After that, you can go back to your 9-to-5 job also, then come back after a couple of years with more strength, more understanding, more maturity. So what I'm going to talk about today, it's basically, I don't want to go into the technicalities of it right now. So the synopsis would be like very common sense like things. What you are doing, why you are doing, are you capable of doing it? If you are not capable of doing it, then you should develop those acumens over time. or you can delegate those acumens to your very carefully selected team. Is the project relevant? I mean, you can think of making a rocket that Tesla is making, but are you in a capacity of building those things at this moment? I mean, nobody knows. You could be the next unicorn, but you have to understand the current ground reality. So based on that, you have to see whether it's viable for you, for your entire team, and whether it's doable by your team or not. Then very important in Indian scenario, at least, and I mean, of course, globally also, but in India, these things are very, very important in the sense that competition is very, very severe because, you know, it's very much dense populated country, and the competition is very stiff. If you are in a major city like in Delhi, Mumbai, or Chennai, so every house has one or two entrepreneurs nowadays, or maybe, or should I say, every building has a few hundred entrepreneurs in their vicinity. What you have to understand is that what is it that you are doing that others cannot do, and if you are able to do it, how you can maintain those secret of the trade. That's very important, and that brings to the next word, that is called product obsolescence. So you might be going to a very premier engineering institute and developing something, but you have to understand that competition is slowly learning from you also. And over a couple of years, you have to think whether your product is going to be obsolete or will it remain relevant or not. That's very, very important. And most of the time what happens is that the startups become totally in love with their product. They develop it over a period of 3-4 years. They come up with something and they see that within 6 months or 7 months, something better product is coming up, or maybe from somebody from overseas is producing those products at half the rate. So you have to understand this thing that product obsolescence is a very important factor, and you have to keep your eyes open, like what is the current R&Ds that is going on across the world, and what are the teams that are working on that particular field. You have to stay updated. Every week you have to learn and read all the articles coming up in your field. So you have to stay updated also. So if there is a minor tweak that is required in your product, you can go for that. And lastly, I would like to say that in this slide, that use your common sense. It's not. You'll be surprised to know that there was one study. I don't remember the reference right now, but hardly 15% cases have been found that it is only the technology that helped build a business. It's rarely the technology. It's more or less about the timing of the product, the team, the execution, the business plan, and there are lots of other things required for a successful business. So the technical thing is basically 15% of the game won. Rest of it is basically the execution part of it. So always use your common sense, even if the product is not that technically sound, or maybe it requires more tweaking over the periods. You can have a very, very efficient execution model and still be successful and get the money that is required to go to the next level and do your research and all those things. Spend money on R&D and then again come back with a better product. So since we are talking of a technology-based entrepreneurship development program that is entirely focused on organic farming and biofuels, so I was going through some of the articles on organic farming in India and the biofuels. Biofuels is very close to my heart because I deal with spirulina, and spirulina is one of the candidates for development of fuel also. So I'll come to that in the next slides. So what we have to understand is that organic farming is a very, very vast field, very complex field. It seems very easy to enter and conquer, but the moment you jump into this field, you will understand what are the challenges. I mean, the seemingly very simple things are very, very complicated to execute. And similarly is the case with biofuels. Even the giants have not been able to crack the codes. So in organic farming, the most important thing that the most important challenge that the people are facing right now is the authenticity of the certifications, the traceability, and the produce that is coming to a customer, whether it's originally an organic product or not. So the certification is very important. Preferably, it should be India Organic and USD Organic certified. You must have seen some of the tea bags nowadays from some famous companies in Lucknow. They are producing with USDA certifications and India Organic certifications. So these certifications are very complex and very difficult to get because it takes years to build the land initially and then develop the product. So it's tough, but it's not impossible. And once you just enter that field, it's very easy to go ahead. Over a period of 2 years, you can develop a particular produce that can be certified as organic also, because lots of tests also go into it. Lab tests like pesticide residues are there, then microbiological studies are there, then similarly several other studies are there that qualifies you to get a organic certification. It's a huge market. The practical problems are perishability of the product. So the innovation could be not just the organic production, but it could be at the processing level. So somebody is producing the organic produce and you can go come up with an innovation that, for example, I'm taking an example like food processing at source. Somebody is producing organic cherry tomatoes. So you think of some unique coating mechanism for those produce so that you can extend the shelf life of that product by 40 days. So that could be a brilliant innovation. Many startups who are coming to Indigram Labs Foundation, they are actually working on these kind of coating mechanisms and shelf life extension products. So you have to understand that you don't have to jump into the production itself. So you could be working on the periphery of these things. It could be food processing. It could be processing at a second level also, like making organic squash also, organic sauce also, that way. Then organic farming, another challenge is basically reaching out to the right customer at the right time and to crack the supply chain of this particular organic farming sector. Organic farming is a very selective market. It's a very niche market. It's growing definitely. It's in some reports I heard that it's growing at 20% CAGR. But at the same time, you have to understand that if an industry is growing, whether it makes sense to you or not, because if you are sitting, say, for example, even if you are sitting in Delhi NCR region and the market is growing at 20% CAGR, $900 million US market, how do you reach out to those customers? How do you find those customers? How do you retain those customers? So this kind of practical issues has to be answered by you. And nobody is going to help you in the sense that that they will provide you a spoon feeding data to you. So I'll come to the data part in some other slides. And in practical terms, you have to understand that in business, what really matters is net profit after tax. Whatever you do, whatever amount of innovation that you bring in, whatever amount of business sense that you show, the final thing that really matters is net profit after tax along with an impact. So if you are able to generate a profit that has impact also on the society, and it's increasing the employability of the farmers, giving them a fair share of the produce, a fair share of the profits, that can be definitely an indicator of success. Then another thing very important in organic farming is exports. Export documentation is very complex and very tricky also. It could be like you check one small box in a wrong place and your entire product might get rejected, and the losses are very high. You have to pay for the transportation, the packaging, and then again return of those products. Then there are penalties also. So organic farming, there is another challenge called exports. And even imports also, because somebody told me that import documentation is also very complicated, and getting things from outside, getting clearance also is very difficult. So these are some of the things that you have to keep in mind while doing organic farming or enter the organic farming sector. Now coming to the biofuels, what I understand from this sector is that biodiesel is very promising, but there are certain issues associated with this biodiesel thing. The most complicated issue is that the diesel engines, the current diesel engines, will not run unless it's slightly modified, or even the filters are somehow modified. So that modification, there are legal issues there are technical challenges there are costs involved in that. So in practicality, it has not taken off so far. But when I say that it has not taken off, that itself means there is a scope of innovation and there is an opportunity there. Compared to that, there is bioethanol. Now, bioethanol basically is nothing but ethanol made out of biological organisms. For example, bioethanol can be produced from duckweeds, from sugars, from potatoes. And you'll be surprised, and many of you must be knowing it, that Brazil already has a law and vehicles that are running on biodiesel with entirely dedicated engines that has been developed and successfully launched in their markets, and they require only bioethanol to run. And bioethanol is a very clean fuel. It's almost pollution free, or rather, I mean, compared to everything else, it can be safely said that it's totally pollution free. And India has a blending law, and with the current petrol, there is already a blending from, it varies from state to state, but there is a blending law of 10 to 20%, and it should increase over the years. So the blending basically means if you have 1 liter of petrol, so 100 ml should be anhydrous ethanol. So there is a scope for production of bioethanol also, but the problem is basically bringing down the cost of production, having the enzymes and the enzymology, and the technological developments chalked out. So at the end, it all boils down to whether you are able to get innovation out of it or not, whether you are able to develop the technology at scale or not, whether you are able to get funding to scale up, whether you are able to collaborate with government bodies, and whether you're able to bring out those finished products successfully or not. So there is definitely a huge scope for biofuels in India. I mean, I'm just taking 2 examples, biodiesel and bioethanol, but there could be others also. And definitely, it's a huge market, and I encourage the entrepreneurs to take up this field and innovate in such a way that you have a prototype and then you go up to the scale-up stages. I mean, the government is always there to help you. There are lots of fundings available, but the proposals has to be of that particular quality. It's a competition. You have to crack the code. So coming to the pre-feasibility, that is the topic of this discussion. So what is feasibility? So feasibility in literal meaning means something which is able to burn. Feasible. So it's a colonial English that meant that during those when they used to raid, so the gunpowder, whether it's able to take up the fire or not. So that's feasibility. So feasibility in literal meaning and in reality, it means whether something is able to take fire or not. But here, the feasibility means whether you will be able to do it or not. So when I say you, that is the most important part. I mean, it could be a friend who is in an entirely different situation, and he is able to pull it off, and you are not able to pull it off. So that means you have not done a pre-feasibility study properly. So it's all about you, whether your team will be able to do it at your place, at your time, at your situation. That's very important. So it's all you-centric. So pre-feasibility. So once you have the feasibility study, before doing the feasibility study at a grander scale, you do a pre-feasibility study. So it's a small sort of study. You can think about going to a small cricket field and learning a particular shot and then going to the main stadium. So that's a rough analogy. In pre-feasibility studies, what really matters is your in-depth research from internet, research from friends and families, research from professors, research from government bodies, reaching out to people, job shadowing, going to the industries, meeting people, taking real life examples, and if you have a role model or some person, you go to him, take time from him, meet him, understand how he faced the problems, how he solved the problems. You do So it could be divided into 3 or 4 aspects. The technical issues, so whether technically this project is feasible or not, in the sense that whether you have the technologies available to develop something. For example, if you want to develop a preservative-free bread, so do you have the technology? Why the big players have not come up with that technology? Why they are still using preservatives? Whether it's feasible at scale or not? So that kind of thing you have to understand. So you cannot just propose something out of the blue and then find out that it's technically impossible. So the most important thing you have to understand that why the big players who have deep pockets, they have not been able to crack it. So if you are able to crack it, I mean, it's amazing. You go for a patent and you can yourself sell that patent to the big players at royalty deals. And that could be in several $1 million. Second is financial. So if you have a grand plan, I'm taking the example of the bread itself. If you have a grand plan of producing 1,000 pieces of bread loaves per day, do you have the financial capabilities? Is it viable or not? Is it economically sustainable or not? Whether you are going to produce something out of that particular unit, which is socially or environmentally correct or not, whether it's detrimental to the environment or not, and do you have the follow-on fundings to scale up? So these kind of things have to be thought about at the preliminary stages, and I ideally call it is that, you know, a laptop and a pen and paper stage, and of course meeting the stakeholders. There's no harm in meeting people. Of course, the competition people, they do not have that much time and they will not give you the entire details, but you have to connect the dots yourself. They will give you 20% of what they know, and out of the 100 people that you meet, hardly 10 or 12 people will be very friendly. And from them, you have to gather the data and connect the dots. Then what really matters is doing the initial testings. Whether you take one example of the bread itself. So you have produced by hand one packet of bread. Now, how do you test the pre-feasibility of it? So you call your friends, bring them on the table, and just give them that bread with some butter, and ask them a questionnaire. You prepare a questionnaire of say, for example, 20 questions, and get the feedback. So that's your pre-feasibility study. Somebody says that, oh, it's a little bit bitter. Somebody says, no, it's very soft. Somebody says that it could have been a little bit harder. So that way you have to find out what went wrong, what is right, and then you have to build a protocol, and you have to stick to a very well documentation. So everything that you document is a gold. Maybe some gold is hiding inside it. Maybe you come up with a, you know, some process where that doesn't require any preservative, or that creates a very unique taste in a particular bread. So you have to understand that documentation is very, very important. Whatever you do, there could be 1,000 failed experiments. I mean, I can take the example of Edison. So he even tested his friend's beards for the filament in the bulb, and that failed, of course. But then finally he found out that only in the vacuum, and a very fine this filament, that bulb is going to work. So there's no harm in experimenting, but documentation is very, very important. Then you have to do SWOT analysis. SWOT is basically strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat. So you have to understand what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, how you hide your weaknesses, how you highlight your strengths, how you come up with your, how you make use of the opportunities, and how you reduce the threats. And of course, the team is very, very important. There are lots of sites online. So, I mean, if you just Google for a couple of days, you will find out more than 100 sites where you will find pre-feasibility documentation reports and all those things. So if you are in NCR region, I would request you to go to NSIC, National Small Industries Commission, or MSME Delhi. It's probably in Okhla. And I've been to NSIC, and I really find them very helpful. And even the MSME sector there in Okhla, there is a training center. So you should go there. They have all those booklets. The booklets have enough project reports, pre-feasibility reports. So from that you can absolutely develop a preliminary document. So I'll definitely encourage you to visit these places, MSME and NSIC in Delhi NCR region, Okhla region. So now coming to the holy grail of now you have to write that particular proposal. So what do you do? Now there is no hard and fast rule that there is a word limit, but most of the people, they think that it should not cross 4,000, 5,000 words. So 4,000 is usually around 15, 16 MS Word file pages. It's a simple document. It should not be technically written. It should not be too much technically written, like that at a funding agency or a bank or a loaning agency is unable to understand it. It should be written in such a way that the person is a non-technical person on the other side of the table, and he is able to understand the basic nitty-gritty of the project. It should include the title. It should include the basic information of the report. It should include a plan of the activities, just like you make any a school science project or something like that, but in a very serious manner and in a well documented and well researched manner. It should have the introductory materials. It should have the materials and methods, and the possible impact and the results that you expect. It should have the proper references. It should have appendices where you can add lots of other information related to the project, which is slightly not relevant to the current plan, but somebody, if they want a secondary read, they can always go to that. And in the basic information, I understand that 5 P's should be mentioned. 5 P is basically from the marketing world. The 5 P's include product, price, place, promotion, and public relations. So the reality of the product, that should be the primary focus of the entrepreneur. What is the product? Even recently, I saw a comment by Elon Musk that people coming from Harvard, MBA, and all those places, they become defocused and they focus on getting money, making money, and the term sheets, this and that, but they forget about the thing that is actually giving them the money. That is the product. So everything revolves around the product. So the more you add value to that, so other things will definitely fall into the place. Then of course the other piece of the product, the price, the place, the promotion, the public relations, and all those things, those has to be taken into account. Always look for examples in the field. If you are developing a say for example a biodegradable a plate, biodegradable plate. So what is there in the current state of affairs in the market? You must have seen that there are several agencies that sell those dried pressed banana leaf that is made into a plate. So I mean, I'm not saying that you disrupt the entire industry, but you can go for another plant-based plate making. You can beat them on pricing. You can beat them on sanitation, on sterilization technologies, on packaging technologies, on distribution methods, on on bulk sales or something like that. So the business plan has to be in such a way that you beat the current competition. Next very important thing is the market information. So you have to gather all the market information. So I have a few questions that's available in the coming up slides, where you can see that how market information is collected and what are the questions that you have to ask for getting those market information. That's very important, because without market information, you are actually shooting from the hip. You don't know what you are doing otherwise. And even if you are doing, maybe you are reinventing the wheel. Then financial sources, of course. I mean, if the project, it looks like you should be able to pull it at 10 lakhs. And then if you have not done your homework properly, you find out one day that, oh no, it will take 20 lakhs because the effluent laws were not taken into consideration. So for the effluent disposals, you need a very specialized filter, and that filter itself costs around 9 lakh rupees. So the moment you were thinking about a 10 lakh project, it becomes 20 lakh projects, and that filter is replaceable. That becomes 30 lakhs projects. So you have to understand that, from end-to-end understanding of a project, you have to visit experts, you have to meet consultants, you have to meet the people who have been, been there, done it all kind of people, take guidance from seniors, from your alumni association, something like that. So the more you gather information, less is the chance of your failure. And I discussed about economics, and what really matters is impact-based profit. At the end of the day, it's net profit after tax and what impact that you create in the business. And even in the profits, you have to understand that unless and until the money comes to your bank, it's still not there. So there are lots of misses between the slips between the cup and the mouth. Time basically could be thought about in the sense that how long will the project take, when you are going to put up the factory, where you are going to put up the factory. If you are going to put up, say for example, in July, and you didn't take into consideration the monsoons, and you start construction and the rains pour in, so that could lead to a significant loss. So timing is very important. And time doesn't just mean seasonality, it means the duration of the project, how efficiently you can conduct it. Social environmental responsibilities, as I discussed, that nowadays it's not just about making money, it's about impact, and impact is created only if you take care of the society and the environmental responsibility. So if you are putting a plant of, say for example, you are putting a power plant at the heart of Delhi, and you are going to burn coal. And you have innovated with a very small, very frugal power plant that burns coal, and you want to now set it up at the heart of Delhi. Do you think that it will get through? Absolutely not, because there are social and environmental responsibilities associated, and there are laws now, very strict laws. So you have to understand that whatever the technology, whatever the business that you are going to set, the production that you are going to set, it has social and environmental issues associated with it. So you have to think from entire point, from A to Z. You have to understand about the business, and you have to jot it down. What could go wrong? What could go right? Now, this is enough of this is the theory. Now we'll get down to a little bit of practice. I'll discuss how to fill up a pre-feasibility report form also later on, but a few slides of theory now that is left. Good source of all information, of course, internet, but there is a caveat that you have to understand that not all sources in the internet are correct, and if you get a wrong data or at least a twisted data, then you will suffer lots of economic damage. So collect basically the data from reliable sources or authenticated sources or from government databases. Meet consultants. So there are lots of professionals who are available in the industry who provide the consultancy at a premium. So you can pay them and get the consultancy reports done. Then there are R&D institutes also who have ready-made project proposals, pre-feasibility reports available. So you can discuss with them. They can customize those PPRs for you, and they can update those PPRs that is already available with them. They can do a preliminary study for you at a premium, and then update those projects for you and give you the reports. There are other people also who actually help you. This could be the banks, the investors, who are basically the ecosystem players. So they can definitely help you. All you have to do is basically go to the bank and say that I want to do this kind of proposal. So you can take an example. You download a particular proposal from MSME or NSIC site. You tweak it a little bit. You make it, you customize it on your own from your own common sense and take it. and go to the bank manager or the family businesses or the investors if they give you time. Of course, the bank manager is easy to get, but the family offices and investors are very difficult to crack at an initial stage. Of course, if you are making money, they will definitely love to get on board. Always use common sense. So as I told you, you have to be road smart. You have to be very careful in choosing the proper team. You have to monitor your employees. You have to, you have to keep in your mind at a pre-feasibility report stage that these kind of challenges will come. So you have to take into the consideration what could be the team structure, what could be the organizational structure, how you will deal with some issues that will crop up. So these things have to be at the back of your mind. So always use common sense in business. So this was what I was talking about in market research. This is definitely not an exhaustive list, but this will give you a rough idea. What is the market size of this year? I mean, say, for example, if you are talking about the organic produce, even in the organic produce market, you think that you can take up citrus fruits. So you chalk down what are the citrus fruits available. I mean, tangerines are there, oranges are there, quinoa is there, several others are there, lemon is there, lime is there, 3 or 4 other there. So you jot down the 5 or 6 citrus fruits, and then you understand the market size of that particular thing. Then you understand why you are very suited for that particular market. I mean, whether it's feasible for you or not to enter that market or not. If there is a relative of yours who is already doing that business, absolutely correct. You can definitely try. Growth rate very important because it's usually very very important to enter a market which is growing, because the moment the market is growing, there is some amount of availability of fodder for the competition. So if you are a new entrant, you have some mileage left in that particular market. But if you think of cutthroat competition in the FMCG, say for example, I mean, it's such a cutthroat market. It seems very easy to make. It seems very easy to launch and get a license and take out your toothpaste brand. But probably thousands of people have tried it, but they have failed very bitterly because it's a very cutthroat competition, and the big players pump in money like anything to stay ahead of the game. Then you have to understand, I mean, annual, 5-year, 10-year markets. What are the fluctuations? Why those fluctuations take place? These kind of things have to be in your reports, and that's why there is a preliminary pre-feasibility report, what is called the preliminary reports, PPRs. Then after that there is a detailed project reports, DPR. So the PPR basically should have some hints about the market study that you have done, and then you can write down that in a DPR probably you will gather all the entire databases for the DPR. Finally, what really matters is whether you fit in that thing. As I told earlier also, you have to fit in that particular game. Unless you fit in there is no story there. That's pretty much it. So with those words, I'll take one example of a template, which I'll just walk through. If you, I mean, it's around 8 or 10 slides, and then we can see that how a typical form of a PPR looks like. So it will give you a rough idea how you can proceed. There are several templates available and some of the banks provide you with different templates, but usually if you have one template ready, then all you need to do is basically cut and paste into other stuff, because the format might be different, but these the basic information remains the same. So for the first one, first page, if I can, I'll just explain it. So for this, you have general information. I mean, names and date of birth, age, project, location, whether you are living in a rented place or you have your own house or not, basic information. What is the type of your newly formed company, whether it's a LLP, whether it's a private limited company or not, whether you have developed a Section 8 company or not for profit, NGO, something like that. This kind of basic information has to be there. Name of the firm, CIN numbers, certificate of incorporation number, MOA, AOAs, and all those things. This kind of a thing. If you have it, if you don't have it, then it doesn't matter because it's a preliminary report. You can say that over a period of 2 or 3 months, you will develop that particular company, and you are in the process of making that company. You are in touch with a chartered accountant or something like that. Then, these kind of basic information follows. Then you give your education qualifications in details and what is your specialization and how you are, good in particular field. Do you have any specialized training, any diplomas, or some sort of skill developments that you have taken over the years, whether you are fit for that particular field or not, that sort of things. Of course, it's okay if you are a fresher, but a fresher with a good idea or good plan or something like that. But work experience definitely counts. For example, if you are already working in a in a food processing industry, and now you want to produce you want to open your own sauce manufacturing unit. So definitely you can understand from a common sense point of view that your work experience will definitely count. So the bank people or the loaning agency will definitely feel safer. Then comes the proposed project, whether it's a manufacturing unit, whether it's a service industry, whether it's a product-based industry, whether you are trading it. Then you give the basics of the project, why you are doing it, why is there a need of that particular project, whether that need actually is viable, sustainable, economically relevant or not. There is a market for it or not, and whether it's a good market fit or not, and whether you are feeling unmet demand or not. This kind of basic information that comes in here. Then comes building and land details. Very important. So if you have already you have a building and you have a terrace there, you can already say that we have a building and we have a terrace space. The top of the floor of your house. If you have, say, for example, 650 square feet available, and you will provide a shed, and in that shed you will be putting the machinery. So definitely, and if it's a non-polluting unit, and it qualifies to be placed in a place like Delhi, then of course you can go for manufacturing if it's a non-polluting unit. And if it's a production unit, then it has to go to the industrial areas, because there are very strict effluent laws and pollution control board checking and all those things. So PPR must take into account these kind of common sense things. Then it becomes a little bit technical. Production program, you don't have to be very expert in understanding these things. You can take help of the consultant or a professional in this. Basically, it can be solved by only one trick, that you go to a particular industry, you understand what are the instruments there, you note down the name and model of that particular instrument, how long it is running, what is the energy consumption of those particular instruments. You note down those things, and then after coming home, you send emails to companies who are producing those kind of instruments or machines, and you get the quote from them. And along with the quote, you ask them what is the amount of electricity these kind of instruments consume and all those things. And that way you can do a production program planning. What are the items required, number of items those required, what are the consumables inside it, what could be the amount of units that you can produce from it, what could be the net profits per year from that, and at what capacity utilization is very important. Capacity utilization is basically if an instrument is running and producing 100 units at 24-hour scale. So in 24 hours, if it's running continuously, if it's producing 100 units, or 1000 units, usually what happens is that that instrument cannot run for 24 hours because it gets heated or it might get burned. So you have to understand at what capacity you have to use that particular instrument or alternate between one instrument or the other. You switch off one instrument and use the other instrument. And that way the capacity utilization has to be calculated. So from one instrument you can take, say for example, 10 hours work, and from the another you can take for 10 hours. Then there is a 4 hours where there are no labor, people are going for sleep or something like that. So 20 hours work cycle, that could be around 70%, 80% capacity utilization of that particular unit. As I was talking about machines and equipment, you have to go to the particular experts or a particular professional, the companies, the places where these things are produced. You can go to digital marketplaces like, India Mart or something, some places like that. And you have to get the quotes, you have to get the bills and understand the electricity loads and needs of those instruments. What is the unit cost? What are the spare part costs? How much electricity do they consume? What is the life of those particular products? What is the depreciation of those products? I'll come to the depreciation in another slide. So that way you have to understand entire the dynamics of those machines. So the life of the machines, the parts of the machine, the consumables, the oiling, the maintenance of those machines, the labor required in those machines, what could go wrong? If the machine goes wrong, what are the backup plans or something like that? Then of course, along with the machines and their parts comes the raw materials. So raw material, for example, if you are preparing a shirt, you require the raw material of cloth. So the cloth becomes your raw material, stitching material becomes your raw material, buttons become your raw material. So you have to do some calculation of how many buttons, how much will be the wastage. What I have seen in my experience is that, the enthusiastic entrepreneurs, they forget that I'm taking the example of this shirt only. So if you want to prepare a shirt production capacity of 1000 shirts per month, and every shirt requires, say for example, 12 buttons. So 1000 into 12 is 12,000 buttons. So you cannot actually rely on 12,000 buttons because there will be lots of wastage. So you have to go for at least 15,000 buttons, because that's how an experienced person can actually tell you that there will be wastage of 10, 20, 30% of raw material. So that way you have to plan it accordingly. You have to use your common sense. You don't, it doesn't have to be always an experienced person. You can use your common sense also, because if something is going inside a machine and raw materials, and button is a very fragile thing, you can easily make out that there could be 10% wastage. Then of course utilities come into place, and that includes the place where you are going to put up the factory. You have to understand whether that particular place is very suitable for that production, whether the market is readily available around that particular production house or not. One of the reasons why Amul was successful, because there was a ready market in Maharashtra and some parts of Gujarat. So you can understand that such a huge organization, the only success reason was that there was a ready market. Otherwise, milk producers were already there. They just tweaked the model. They aggregated that particular milk production. They brought in all the technologies, but the most important factor, even from their one of the lady directors from there, she had herself told in record that it was because of the availability of the market, ready market, that Amul was such a huge success. And it's a success story that will remain forever. So utilities, definitely electricity, whether industrial load is required or not, whether housing units are required or industrial units are required. The load requirements are different in housing setup and in the industrial setups. What could be the electricity annual cost? What could be the scenario if the electricity bills actually go up? Usually what happens is that every couple of years, these kind of electricity bills actually have some increase, some GST increase or something like that. So you have to take into account that over a couple of years, even the government is going to raise the billing amounts. Then there are water, whether you are boring it, whether you have the license for it or not, whether you'll be buying water for it or not, whether the water quality requirement is distilled water or not, whether it's a running tap water or not, quality of the water, quality testing of the water, what could be the heating source, whether it's oil, coal, diesel, whatever it is. You have to take into account everything about it. And of course, miscellaneous things or not, something like that. If, for example, you have to think about a backup plan for labor strike. So if you have 20-30 labor that you have considered unskilled labor that will be working there, you have to understand that at some point there could be some feud and the 20 labor will just resign. So what is your backup plan? You cannot just stop your factory because of a resigning employee. So you have to keep a backup plan. You have to always have a good backup plan. Then continuing on that, the manpowers. Definitely it varies from project to project, but mostly in 80% of the cases you require a small portion of skilled manpower, those who are technically sound and they're able to deal with very complicated instruments. They're able to even service those instruments also. So that's a very niche part of the manpower. I should say that around 20% are usually skilled manpower. Then come the semi-skilled who are actually learning from the skilled people, and they are not required in absolutely dealing with those complicated instruments, but they are actually the helping hand of the skilled people. And unskilled people are basically the hands and legs of the project. So they'll do all sorts of multitasking things. Then there is an office and there is office staff to deal with the sales and communications and taking orders, purchase orders, fulfillment of orders, doing the paperwork and filing of taxes and bills and all those things. So all these things have to be thought about. So pre-operative expenses from this this slide. So you have to understand that there is a project report. If you are getting it done from a professional, there will be charges for that. Usually it's 20-30,000 rupees. If you are doing it from a reputed organization, a consultancy. So that's a pre-operative expenses, and then of course for conducting those for getting those project reports from the consultant themselves actually do the market survey. Nothing like if you can do the market survey, but the consultants can do on your behalf if you are doing a value-added, if you are getting a value-added service from them. Then of course there are legal costs, there are lawyers involved in every step in business. There are compliances nowadays. There is mandatory compliances, and it's very important. Even if you are unable to comply online, even for a month, something might crop up that your company might get banned, might get blacklisted somewhere. You might not be able to sell through. You might not be able to get those bills and all those things passed. So compliance is very important for that, and you have to do the preliminary surveys. What could be the compliances? What could be the legal issues that has to be borne by the promoter? Market study I have already discussed, and you can always add some appendices where it's not directly related to the project, but definitely it could be related to somewhat distantly related to the project. But of course, it could be an interesting read for the loaning agency. Then comes the cost of the project. Finally, you have calculated everything. Now you are just adding up all the expenses. You have the land buildings. So I took the example of a shed on the terrace of your house. So if a shed requires 1.5 lakhs, so you add that. In the shed you have to put in exhaust fans. You have to put in grill, iron grill and all those things, doors, furniture, this and that. So that comes under the land and building. And if it's a complete factory in a what you call these industrial areas, then of course the prices actually go up. Machinery equipment we already discussed. Try to get it from government sites. So there are lots of rebates for these entrepreneurs nowadays. So if you are buying from, say, for example, India Mart, and it's a government recognized machinery that has that runs on CNG or something like that, and it is it's labeled green or something like that. So you can take lots of rebates from the government from that, and the rebates turn to be around 20-30% actually. So for machineries imported also, there are, if you are getting those instruments from government certified R&D organizations, there is also rebate there. So you have to understand where you can get the government concessions. So that's very important while getting the machinery and the equipments. Furniture and fixtures, of course, try to go for the furniture and fixtures which will last for at least 5 years. So ideally it should be made of steel, and it should be of good quality and good strength and durability, so that it should last 5 years, and it should actually be within the norms of that particular area. So you should not go for very unrealistic calculations. So if there is, say for example, if you are in the Northeast and you are setting up a industry, and if you see that bamboo is very easily available there, then you should go for the bamboo rather than for the steel. So you have to be very site specific. So then you do the fixed capital. So these are coming under the fixed capital costs. So once you put in the money, it remains there. There are very less variables in this. So either it's maintenance or something like that, annual maintenance, something like that there. So these usually come under the fixed capitals. Then comes the working capitals. Basically, working capital means something which rotates, and that capital is basically you have to pump in every a few months. There you find that there's raw materials are required. Then you could be providing in a B2B model, business to business model. You could be providing a semi-finished product to another business, and they'll be finishing it up into a finished product. So that depends on the business, and basically it's having your raw material stock from that particular capital. You are buying that raw material stock and providing a finished product. Up to that level, what has been the capital requirements that you have to calculate within a particular duration. If you want a working cycle of 6 months, working cycle of 2 months, 3 months, every quarter, that way you have to calculate what could be the requirements and how big these kind of things are required in terms of loans, because the banks actually ask what is your requirement of working capital for 2 months, 3 months, every quarter, something like that. So you have to calculate, you have to break down your requirements every 3 months, something like that, and then you do the totaling. Finally, what you have to do is you have calculated the fixed capital, then you come to the working capitals, and then the pre-operative expenses, preliminary expenses, whatever that you had calculated initially, and then total all together. That gives you the total cost of the project. And now these are all in your hand, that okay, now I'll require 10 lakh rupees to do all these things. Done. Now what you have to think, what could be the means of the finance? Where can I get that 10 lakh rupees now? I don't have that 10 lakh rupees. How do I get that 10 lakh rupees? I prepared a very detailed cost analysis of the project. I know that I've got the bills, quotations and all those things. I know what could be the working cycles. I know, I'll have a competitive edge. You have come to that stage that, okay, I have done entire analysis, and I know that with the investment of 10 lakh rupees, I can come up with a very unique product, very innovative product, and I can go for the production straight away. But then comes the next phase, very important phase, means of financing. You don't have 10 lakh rupees. How will you get that 10 lakh rupees? Then comes the loans. It could be either an angel investor, it could be a family or friend round, it could be a term loan from a bank, it could be a working capital loan, it could be your own investment from your own savings, anything. It could be a government subsidy also. So if you are putting in, you require 10 lakh rupees and you draft a proposal in such a way that it becomes a rebated project of 5 lakh rupees. So all you have to put in is now 5 lakh rupees. Now you had the capability of putting 5 lakh rupees and you didn't have the rest of the 5 lakh rupees. So you drafted the proposal in such a way that a particular organization of the government will be willing to give you, say for example, Ministry of Renewable Energies, you want to produce windmills, And these are very unique windmills. Now you have come up with an innovation of, say, for example, a carbon fiber windmill that is very, very light and it's very efficient and it doesn't kill the birds. It's very good for the environment. It's more efficient. It makes more electricity. It's very easy to install. This kind of innovation you have come up now and you want to just produce it. And definitely the Ministry of Renewable Energies will try to support you. So you have to understand where you can get the subsidies, how you can pitch in. So you have to present yourself in such a way that your proposal goes through. Now, next stage, and we are all doing the hypothetical analysis, and we are already in the last phases of the PPR. Now the bank will ask, okay, I'm giving you 10 lakh rupees. What is there for me? Because they are giving you a loan, they want to take it back from you over a few years. It could be a soft loan, but of course, at the end of the day, you have to return it. How do you return it? So that's where you calculate the profitability analysis. What could be the revenues from the sales? What are your manufacturing expenses? How much is your cost price? How much is are the costs borne by your company? How much is the labor cost? What are the administrative costs? What were the transportation costs, packaging costs? And if you have the instruments that are bought in loan, what happens is that you must have seen that when you buy a car and the insurance agent comes in, first year the insurance agent charges, if I'm taking an example of a 5 lakh rupees car, you must have seen that in the first year what comes is basically an insurance of 15-20,000, and the value is written around 4 lakh something. Within a 1 year period, you will see that the same insurance company, they will charge you a little bit less, but the value of your particular car, it goes down to 3 lakh rupees. You must have seen that. So it's exactly the same thing. If you have taken some machine in loan, if you have bought it for 5 lakh rupees and you are still paying it and it's in insurance, its value actually gets down over the years. So the moment after 10 years, if you want to sell it off, that particular capital cost actually goes down. So it gets depreciated. So you have to take into account that your capital cost is actually going down. I mean, the land is yours. Land is, land money might go up. It might not go up in all places, but the instruments and all those things, there is a depreciation. Then finally, once you add up all these things, you have the income taxes and you have all the taxes and all those things that you have to pay. You have paid your employees, you have paid for all other things, and now you are calculating your net profit after tax. Usually that's what boils down to. So if you have a net profit after tax, that means you have done a very brilliant job in producing a particular PPR that actually shows some profit. And usually what is seen, if you see the government proposals and the project reports, very few of the projects have a good and handsome amount and practical amounts of net profitability. So you have to always think of net profitability from day one. So you have to reverse engineer. OK, I need this much amount of net profit after tax. Now, what should I do that I can get that particular profit? So you have to go in the reverse direction from that net profit after tax and then make the PPR. Then, of course, there are supplementary details. Your legal informations and whether you have some disease or not. I mean, your insurance policies and whether you have insurances or not. What is your monthly incomes? Whether you have a legal case against you or not. Whether you have been charged with some sort of crime or not. These kind of details are actually asked these days. Then finally, very important thing is the references. So if you are going to a bank, I'm taking an example. If you are going to a bank and the bank manager knows someone, and if you are giving the reference of that particular person and that particular person is actually a successful businessman, so do you think that that particular project will go through? Absolutely. There is, a 1,000-fold increase in the chances of getting that project approved.
because that manager knows that person, and that person is an established businessman, and he vouches for you. So there is some weightage into that. So give references in those proposals very seriously, and something that will click. I mean, again, it's the common sense that you have to apply. Then sign and all those things, and put it in a particular format according to that the requirements of that particular organization. So saying all these things, there are lots of caveats. Caveats means basically, there are hits and misses. There are some problems in every places. Very difficult to find out a good consultant, a genuine consultant. Usually what happens is these consultants, they just cut paste the previous reports and do some, statistical jugglery and give you the report. So it's always best to do your own test marketing, generate your own questionnaire and get the answers to that. Do your own interviews, do the job shadowings, internet data. I mean, of course, you can take those data, but try to go out into the field and understand what is the ground reality. Meet people with sound backgrounds and people who have good reputation in the market and in the ecosystem. So if you are going to a person, just do some preliminary analysis of that person, take a secondary reference for that person. And in this entire PPR reporting, and of course in the entire business model for entrepreneurship, you have to help yourself. There is no other way. If you have a bright idea and you are talking it to your colleague, so there is nothing that stops that colleague from doing that particular business, because everybody is a competition. So you have to help yourself, you have to save yourself. So from my experience at Indigram Labs Foundation, I've been here for the last 2 years. I've been a manager here, and I have met more than 200 startups so far in the agri-tech, food tech, and clean tech sector. And some of them have been, really successful. Farmlay, for example, this startup actually deals in end-to-end supply chain management of very niche products like, dry fruits, makhanas, and all those things. They came to us with 4 lakh per month revenues, and through our connections and our references and our meetings and showing them the field testing facilities, they are now at around 25 CR per month, and it's increasing. 25 crores per month, their revenues are there, and they are still growing. And this is one of the biggest success stories probably in the entire agri-tech and farm tech sector. Then Intello Labs, basically it's a way they have innovated at an international scale. So if you have a smartphone and download their app, so they can make use of that particular camera of yours, and they have AI ML based algorithms that if you scan a particular fruit or vegetable, within fraction of a second they can grade and give the shelf life of that particular product. So they have that amount of AI ML based product development, and they have instruments also for sorting and grading also. So they have instruments, where there is a conveyor belt and there are cameras and there are distributors. So if there is a fruit, say for example, apple is coming, so a grade A apple will automatically fall into the A basket, and grade B apple will fall into the B basket, and similarly C and D and all those things. So they are recipient of lots of funds, lots of awards, and their innovation is probably world class. Walmart is taking their technology, Reliance is taking their technology, and several others in the pipeline. Then Woodbury, it's a very unique startup. We found them through an acceleration program that we conducted in Northeast India, and the founder is a very educated person, PhD. He was an ex-employee at Terry. So he has developed a mushroom technology, the Kumbi. So what's in the Kumbi is basically a very unique property that moment it gets a particular frequency of ultraviolet rays, it just like human beings, it develops vitamin D, but at a very high scale. So this particular entrepreneur, they came across this particular finding, they immediately patented it, and they've developed a technology in such a way that the bioavailability of that particular vitamin D is almost 67%, 70%. I mean, way more than all the tablets, vitamin D tablets available in the market. And it's absolutely natural. And you get the added proteins and the tasty curries of the mushroom. And I personally like their mushroom in the tikka form, mushroom tikka. Then there is Krishi Tantra. They are very well funded. They're very well known in the sector right now, and all the agri-tech and food tech investors are just after them, after the team of Krishi Tantra. So they have developed a soil testing kit and an instrument that is the size of 1 cubic feet, probably a couple of kilos in weight. And it's totally AIML based, and all you have to do is take the soil sample and put it in a hole and in that instrument, and within a few hours it will give you the test, whereas the rest of the competition gives the tests, and it's a very manual, intensive the stuff that you have to do in the traditional ones for at least 15 days. So they have reduced the turnover time from 15 days to probably 5-6 hours, and that data actually gets sent to your smartphone and the experts, and they can give you further direction based on that. So these 4 I just curated for this particular talk, but there are more than 60 startups with us. All are innovative, all are well funded, and almost all are successful and doing good business. So it's a very inspiring journey, because I am myself an entrepreneur. And when I see these kind of people coming up with this innovation, and it's not a very very joyful story. They have had that struggle. They quit their jobs. They struggled for 5 or 6 years to develop these products. No, there were no takers. They were joked, ridiculed, but I mean, they came up like phoenix, and they have finally conquered their ground. So my take-home message is basically that you have to take your own responsibility. Nobody is going to help you. This is the only thing that this is the only the quality that I think that I see in entrepreneurs that come here, that they are indomitable. They are responsible for their own activities. They know what to do, and I mean, they're in the soup. They have to come up with something, otherwise, I mean, they'll not get their bread and butter. They are not in a salary. So they have to sell some product. They have to develop some product that will sell and give them the money to survive. So that kind of dedication and importance has to be there. Respect has to be there for this profession. So you have to understand that your bread and butter comes from those innovation and selling. You have to live in reality. You have to do all the research work. It's a continuous process. Every week you should go through all the articles, all the developments that is taking place. You have to be at the top of the game. And in my last talk also, I talked about don't mix with no-sayers. Naysayers is basically no-sayers. So there will always be people who will say 9 to 5 job kar lo bhaiya, sabse badhiya, itna risk mat lo, kya pata kya ho jayega. So my answer to them is that of course you are right. What you should do is basically stay in the 9 to 5 job, test the waters with one leg, open your company, do some test marketing, come up with small products, see what is working, see what is not working, develop and grow slowly. And when you see that, yes, of course, it's growing, then you should quit your job and then go 100% into that particular venture. Always sit with winners. I mean, make it a point that every 15 days you should visit a very successful entrepreneur and sit with them and go to them. Like, for example, you are going to take a video interview of them. So you can go to them and say, take time from them and say that and write to them that I have a very private channel. I have a channel in YouTube and I want to just interview you. Nobody will stop you. They will give their time of half an hour within a month or something like that. So go and meet them. You will understand what kind of energy these kind of people have. and you will get inspired for the next 6 months. I mean, it's just like a tuning fork. So you beat one fork and you'll see that the vibration in the second fork. And being an author, I'll just end up with a small story. So you all have heard this rabbit and tortoise story. So there is a twist to it. What happens is that this is the post the race. Now the race is over. Now both of them have to go back to their home. But the problem is that there is a huge field of 1 kilometer that has to be covered, and then there is a river. So both of them are discussing. They are thinking that okay, one is a winner, one is a loser. They just forget about it. What they decide is basically is that okay, there is a 1 kilometer and it's a sunny day, so the rabbit can run very fast. So that they decide that for that 1 kilometer run, the tortoise will sit on the back of the rabbit, and they will cover that 1 kilometer very quickly. They do it, and then they reach the river. Now the rabbit doesn't know how to swim, and it will fall probably because of the currents and all those things. And the tortoise is a very experienced swimmer. Now the rabbit sits on the back of the tortoise, and they cross the river. So and after that crossing the river, they go home and they're happy. They are very friendly ever after. They live happily ever after. So the moral of the story is basically nowadays, I mean, you have heard the previous story over the years, over the generations, but the current story is basically you have to collaborate, you have to play on your strengths. Even if you don't like somebody, even if you have a friend who are not willing to join you, you have to negotiate, you have to bring them to the table, and you have to build up a team. And every team member has some specialization. You have to understand, and you have to hone their skills, and you have to work as a team. And with that, I'll just love to take a few questions. Thank you.
Sir, as someone is doing PhD, so he doesn't have any advantage in starting his own venture or MBA. I'm just asking a basic question.
Good question. So see, being optimistic in answering this question, basically, PhD gives you maturity. PhD gives you a sort of patience over the years. So if you are working on particular thing and you are spending 3-4 years and you are understanding the nitty-gritty of a project, you understand how to do research article writing, you understand how to go through the literature and all those things. Definitely over the years it will help you. But I mean, there's no age of entrepreneurship. I mean, most of the entrepreneurs have started young, and even a BSc is good enough to start, because technology, as I told you, that 15% is relevant in terms of technology. You can always hire a PhD at a later stage, because
Okay,
most
sir.
of the current firms, they have this kind of setup only. So somebody who is MSc and who is the founder of a particular company, and if they are successful and they have the funding and the money, they usually hire experts at a later stage to develop something. So age is not a bar, but of course, if you have a PhD and you are already doing a PhD, then try to make use of that journey, that experience.
Thank you, sir.
So you talked about work experience. So, sir, in my point of view, so work experience for a bachelor or a fisherman comes from internship or workshop. So, sir, do your company offers any like internship programs for bachelors like us?
So one very easy way to get experience is to join as an intern in a company.
Yes, sir.
You can always join as an intern and try to help out the seniors there. You can join there for a couple of months or 6 months or 1 year. And you can hop between particular companies also to get multiple experiences. So internship is the best way to get experience. And this is actually a part of job shadowing.
So, sir, do IndiGram company offers internships?
I mean, we can discuss this offline, and you can send me an email And
Okay,
based on the requirement, we can definitely just connect.
always. So I am also keen to know something about your work self. Like yesterday night, I was just scrolling your LinkedIn IDs and I got to found that after completing your PhD in 2007, you joined University of Witwatersrand and then after University of Pennsylvania. So I just want to know if you can.
No, what is the question?
So I just want to know like how about your work journey like after completing
Okay,
your
oh, got it, got it, got it.
PhD.
It was not very smooth, to tell you the truth. Postdoc after PhD, postdoc was very smooth. I mean, I published several articles. I learned so many technologies there, DNA sequencing and chromatin immunoprecipitations and triple C and I mean lots of molecular biology techniques and all those things that were very bright at that time. Even now, I mean, these things are very relevant. But then I came back. I taught in Delhi University for 3 years. Then I didn't get the permanent job there because even though I was quite well qualified, and so I lost the job basically, and I had nothing to do but come up with some sort of plan what to do. And luckily, I had some money in the bank that I had saved from postdoc. But then, after doing postdoc and doing 3 years teaching, you don't want to sit at home. So I started my own biotech company. I started, I narrowed down into spirulina tablets and nutraceutical tablets. So I joined Shriram Institute for Industrial Research as an incubatee. I was there for 1.5 years. I came up with the finished product. I did the trials and the quality testing and all those things. And I still have that product, and it's running well. So that way, and in between, I hopped into this job, this manager of an incubation system, because I wanted to stay aware of the startups that are coming into the ecosystem, and the brilliant startups coming in the Indian innovation ecosystem. Brilliant startups. I mean, out of the mind. If I talk about one startup was called Loopworm with us. He's one of the incubators. So they are coming up with soldier fly larva as a feed for poultry and fish. So the way they have narrowed down the processes, even the Australian firms have not been able to do it. So this is an inspiring thing. I mean, even if you are an entrepreneur, you get inspired from other entrepreneurs who are almost half the age of you. So that actually keeps me in that field. So even if I have a day job, I can work in the nights because I'm always inspired, and I write in the night also. So I have 6 publications in Amazon books, fictional books, and that also keeps me inspired because I love to write novels. One of the novels actually narrowly missed into a web series. So I keep on trying, doing different things. So that keeps me alive as an entrepreneur also.
So it's really motivating for us, like being authors and lots of diversity you've seen in your life, and
True.
nowadays you are at here in this place.
True.
So it's really motivating for us.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Any other questions?
Sir?
Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Sir, I'm asking about the. Can you tell us some tools that can help us to product research? What will be the product we are looking for? So some tools actually. There are some speakers. They talked about how to search for products, what you want to make. But can you like I'm a student. I am all. I always been on a phone or a laptop. Can you tell us some tools online available that can help us to decide what type of product you should choose or motivate? I think. Can you tell us some?
So you are on mute.
So you want to mute it.
So see what I gather from your question. So is basically is that what kind of product that you want to jump into. So
Yes, sir.
it's very difficult, to say that what fits you or what you will be successful with, but it's basically an introspection sort of thing. You write down who you are, what are your likings, what are your challenges. You write down what are your strengths. You write down what you are good at. You write down what are your motivating things. You write down what are the things that you like. You write down, okay, these are the products that I want to buy. Now, sometimes, some of the entrepreneurs came to me and they said that my inspiration was to buy a Mercedes car, and he bought it in front of us. So the Mercedes showroom is very nearby to our technology business incubator. So he bought from there only. So it could be anything. I mean, the motivation could be anything. So you can see from one of the entrepreneurs that he wanted to buy a very luxury car. So for that reason, he just went out to become an entrepreneur. So it's a very personal thing. I mean, you can come up with a very innovative product, or you can take a normal product and sell it like anything. Develop a selling plan, develop a business model. For example, the Farmlay that we have, the startup that I was talking about, they have not innovated on anything except streamlining a supply chain management. So they are buying those dry fruits and makhanas and all those things from source. They are doing contract farming also, and then selling it to the big players, B2B players. They are exporting also. So it's not always that it's just the product. So it's where you want to go sometimes. So it's just a means of fulfilling your own inner desires.
Okay, sir. Sir, actually, I was asking because you are already a manager of such a firm where you are interacting and get involved in several innovative and startups. So I think you can give it some tips how to look into it, sir. So that's why I ask.
So I mean, continuing on that, so it's just up to you. What I mean, there are millions of products. So as I told you that you have to help yourself. So you have to understand what products. So you have to do entire spectrum of your own introspection. I mean, in marketing term, it's said that you have to be a balance of introvertness and extrovertness. So you have to understand the external world also and an internal world also, and then come up with a fine line between the two. So what you like, what you can do a reality check, do some research, do a PPR, and I mean, it's PPRs are not just like one product. So you could do PPRs for 10 products, and then just understand and okay, of these 5 or these 10, I think that these 2 are very relevant to me. I think for example, I am in love with pens. I love pens. So it could be a motivating factor. You can just straight away go for a wooden pen manufacturing unit that is viable, that uses eco-friendly ink or something like that. So I'm just taking a rough example for you. So it's all up to you.
Sir, ultimately PhD leads to teaching only. Sir, like मेरा क्या मानना है, जैसे मैंने बहुत लोगों से सुना है कि कहते हैं PhD करनी है तो फिर टीचिंग, अगर आपका टीचिंग लाइन में ज्यादा वो है तो आप PhD करो, वरना थोड़ा आपको इंडस्ट्री उसमें जाना है तो MBA. तो लाइक सर, अगर जैसे इंडस्ट्रीज में जैसे R&D डिपार्टमेंट होता है सर, अगर उसमें हम PhD करके जाना चाहें, मतलब हमें कुछ प्रोजेक्ट्स पर ही काम करना है और फिर आगे अपना वेंचर ऐसा कुछ करके आप समझ रहे हो, तो सर वो चीज जानना चाहता.
ठीक है, इसका आंसर दे देता हूँ मैं. भाई एक बात बताओ, जब तुम PhD कर रहे होते हो, PhD करके निकलते हो, आर यू द चूजर? तुम तो चूजर नहीं होते हो ना. तुम्हारे पास चूज करने के लिए कुछ होता ही नहीं है. होता क्या है, आफ्टर PhD you will go to a particular firm. If it's a private firm, you will be joining as a trainee scientist or something like that. और trainee scientist का क्या होता है प्राइवेट सेक्टर में, ये भी बता दूं आपको लाल पीले हरे ट्यूब पकड़ा दिए जाते हैं, बोलते सैंपल A B C है, इस पे ये काम करना है, ये करके ये रिजल्ट बना के हमको दे दो. यू आर केप्ट ब्लाइंडेड अबाउट इट बिकॉज वो नहीं चाहते कि उनका इंफॉर्मेशन लीक हो जाए. तो आपको ये खाली बोला जाएगा ट्यूब ए, ट्यूब बी, ट्यूब सी में ये है, ये चीजें हैं, ये मिलाओ, ये करो करके इसका रिजल्ट एनालिसिस करके मुझे दे दो. तो प्राइवेट सेक्टर में धीरे धीरे मतलब वो हर जगह में ही बोरियत आ जाती है. बट व्हाट यू हैव टू डू इज दैट, मतलब अंदर का जो कीड़ा है एंटरप्रेन्योरशिप का या जो भी है, क्योंकि अभी हम डिस्कस कर रहे हैं एंटरप्रेन्योरशिप के ऊपर, तो उसको अलाइव रखने के लिए तुम्हें सेल्फ मोटिवेशन लाना पड़ेगा. और सबसे बढ़िया सेल्फ मोटिवेशन है कि आसपास अपने सक्सेस स्टोरीज देखो. और पीएचडी के बाद देयर आर लॉट्स ऑफ स्कोप नाउअडेज. पीएचडी के बाद नॉट नेसेसरी आपको एमबीए करना है, कुछ नहीं करना है. लाइफ सबसे बड़ा एमबीए है. एक बार निकल पड़ो, कोई ना कोई एक प्रोडक्ट बना लो, 2-3 महीने के अंदर बना के निकल पड़ो रास्ते में. एक बार रास्ते में खड़े होके बेच के देखो, लोगों का रिएक्शन देखो. लोग जब मुंह हटा लेते हैं, एक बार मतलब धक्का दे के निकल जाते हैं, वो फीलिंग अंदर रखो अपने. वो समझो कि रास्ते पे जब हम उतरते हैं बिना किसी नाम के, बिना किसी औकात के, बिना किसी आइडेंटिटी के, तो लोग कैसे बिहेव करते हैं वो जानना बहुत ज़रूरी है. दरवाजे में खटखटा के एक शैम्पू जाके बेच के आके दिखाओ. वो अगर नहीं बेचते हो, कितने लोग दरवाज़ा बंद कर देंगे मुंह के ऊपर, पता नहीं कहाँ से आ जाते हैं ये वो. ट्राई टू एब्जॉर्ब दोज काइंड ऑफ एनर्जीज. वो फिर समझ आएगा कि भाई लाइफ इज़ वेरी क्रूअल. वो चीज़ समझना बहुत ज़रूरी है. क्योंकि यूजुअली क्या होता है, जो सिस्टम में तुम हो या हम लोग सब हैं, पढ़ाई लिखाई जो चलता रहता है, इसमें एक कुशनिंग होती है. ये रियल लाइफ से आपको बहुत अलग करके रखता है. तो तुम्हारा बीएससी हुआ, एमएससी हुआ, पीएचडी हुआ, सब कुशन है. तुम देखो रियल लाइफ से तुम काफ़ी दूर हो. लेकिन जैसे ही बाहर आओगे, उसके बाद आके तुम देखोगे काफ़ी कुछ नहीं कर पा रहे हो. उसके लिए सबसे बड़ा रीज़न यही है कि वो कुशनिंग हट गया है तुम्हारा. वो कुशनिंग हटने के बाद ही तुम रियलिटी को सब समझ पाते हो. बाहर निकल के एक शैम्पू का पैकेट बेच के दिखाओ, उसमें जो तुम्हारी जो नॉलेज गैदर होगी ना, वो कई सालों का तुम्हारा एक्सपीरियंस से ज़्यादा होता है वो. तो जिंदगी क्या है कि लोग हटा के देखो, मतलब धूप में नहाओ, घटाओ में निकल के देखो. ऐसा कुछ था जो वो करना बहुत ज़रूरी है. और मोस्ट ऑफ द केसेस में आप तुम देखोगे जो एंटरप्रेन्योर्स हैं, बड़े बड़े आईआईटीज से ये वो करके वो भी ऐसे निकले हैं. Housing.com का जैसे मैंने लास्ट टाइम एग्जांपल लिया था, मैं उनसे मिला था यहाँ पे दिल्ली में जब आए थे. वो एक अपना जीनियस ट्यूटोरिंग का खोला था उन्होंने. तो उन्होंने बताया था कि मतलब IIT मुंबई के वो लोग टॉप मोस्ट टीम थे. अब वो लोग सारा जो डेटा कलेक्शन करने के लिए घरों में जाके दरवाजा खटखटाते, तो बहुत लोग उनमें गाली वाली देके दरवाजा बंद कर देते थे. बट ही एब्जॉर्ब दोज नेगेटिविटीज और उसको चैनलाइज किया कि नहीं, वो मुझे करना है. वो जो भी करते रहे, मुझे डेटा चाहिए. करते करते आज देखो कितने hundreds of millions of dollars का है Housing.com. तो वो रियल लाइफ में एक्सपीरियंस लेना वो अलग ही एक नशा होता है. वो लेना बहुत ज़रूरी है.
ओके सर, थैंक यू सर.
It's a very nice explanation.
Any? Still there are questions, sir.
Ma'am, can I ask?
Yeah, you can.
Good evening, sir. Sir, this is Ajay. Sir, sir, as you mentioned about contract farming, sir. So, what is the role of government in contract farming? Because recently Farm Bill has 2020. In that, contract farming is the main thing which they have passed. Sir, how government should, how government should look after this contract farming, sir? Because there are so many pros and cons in contract farming. How government will support it, sir?
Correct. So what I meant basically is not going into the political aspects of it, but if a big company comes to you and says that I'll provide you the international technologies, and you have 2 hectare land, and they want to provide you the technologies and test market something, so and they will provide you the money for that, and far more than the market possibility. So it's your decision to take the call, and not necessarily all the MNCs are bad. So it's not always like that. So the motto of all the MNCs is to make money, and the way of making money is basically win-win situation for everybody. So it's money making is a chain. So everybody in the chain actually gets benefited once the top players make the money. So contract farming is from a political point of view, I don't know what's the agenda of the people, but from a personal point of view, I think that if everything is checked in a proper way, and the farmer knows what he is doing, and he knows where he is signing, and he understands the legal aspects of it, then it's a profitable venture for everybody.
Thank you, sir. Even I feel the same.
Correct.
Okay, if there are no more questions, then we can close the session. Okay. Okay, so I want to thank you, sir. Thank you so much for a wonderful session and sharing your inspiring learning experience. And it was really interesting and informative. And sir, you very well explained the path one entrepreneur that should follow before starting any ventures. And thank you for your time today. And many thanks from all of us, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Anytime. Thank you. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
Thank you.
sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.